just a quick reminder, if you are on the CCM Events Network, please disconnect and connect to the CCM Guest Network, and the password is CCM Sharing. That's just because we're using the Events Network for live streaming the event. So our next speaker is here all the way from Berlin. He is working on the iOS SDK at Contentful. He was previously a Java developer, right? He is the senior recruiter at CocoaPods, previously Git submodules. Boris Bügling.
Yeah, hey. We're going to talk about extending Xcode today. First, a quick word about Contentful, because we just launched. There's a coupon code there, which does something when you sign up. What we are doing is we have CMS and API, which gives you JSON, so you can basically for your app, website, or anything when you content manage. So, to the talk, the agenda is I'll talk about Xcode, talk about how you can use plugins, and then talk about how you can write them. This is a quick one about Xcode. Because some people who are using Xcode are saying, like, the things you can do with Xcode plugins, it's all built right into Xcode. But this was my last experience with Xcode. Xcode. What many of you may not know is that Xcode itself is basically just a huge set of plugins. And the last time I gave this talk, I was just saying that even though there's no public API, it's probably not going away and is relatively stable. Today I can show you because Xcode 6 came out and everything still works. So here you can see that Xcode is just a huge number of plugins. So there are a couple of ways to extend Xcode beyond plugins. There are color schemes, file templates, project templates, and the plugins. So now we're talking about using plugins. How does it even work? This guy made it really easy, together with the other two. It's Marin, Delisa, and Yura. They wrote Alcatraz, the Xcode package manager. And you can install it with this little line. And if you do, you get a new menu item, package manager, under window, and it opens the window on the right hand side, which shows you all kinds of plugins, file templates, color schemes, ready for you to install. How does it work? There's a JSON file with all the packages you can install, and it's hosted on GitHub. It clones the repository of the plugin or file template or whatever, and if it's a plugin, it runs Xcode build to build it locally for you. So some cool plugins. Start with Clang format. That we will demo the plugins actually. Clang format uses a feature which is pretty new in Clang, which formats source code. Let's see where Xcode is. So we have to make it a bit bigger. Okay. So Clang format adds a menu item, and we can now select some code, Clang format, and do a format selected text, and it reformats it. Fuzzy autocomplete, a personal favorite of mine. This basically makes the Xcode autocomplete work like the AppCode autocomplete, which means if you use something which is your autocomplete will only work if you complete the start of the word or the symbol, but with this will also work with the middle part or anything. Let's just find something here. Okay, you have to trust me that it works. Sorry. Case image named. That is pretty cool because it's basically auto-completion for images. What this does is if you are in an app which has some images, you can say your image. Named. Okay, sorry. Maybe I shouldn't have used Xcode 6 for this. Color sense. It's the same for colors. Auto-completion for colors, which also shows you a color palette for choosing a color. And it gives you the code for the UI color then. This is really great, polychromatic. It changes the way the source code formatting works, or rather the syntax highlighting. Normally you get the stuff highlighted which is built in, and your own stuff it's not highlighted. And this basically turns it around and gives you highlighting for all your variables and properties. Like every property and every variable gets its own color, so you can see it right through the source file. Show in GitHub. Should be able to demo this. Just adds another menu item to Xcode, which allows you to open the file in GitHub or the commit. I'm not connected to the Wi-Fi right now, but you can see here that there's some, or you can't see it. Okay. It opens some URL on GitHub. Okay. Next up, VB Documenter Xcode. This makes documentation much more easy because you just type in 3 slashes for a comment, and it auto-completes to a whole block, which shows you gives you the parameters and the return, and you just have to fill out the actual stuff and not the markup. Xcode beginning of line. This is also really great because it fixes how beginning of line works. Xcode colors. This is a bit of a complicated one. This enables you to do colored output in the debug console. For that, you have to write some code though. Basically, you have an additional header file which you include, and then you can say this NSLog is blue, for example. So, how can you develop your own plugins? Getting started, it's pretty easy. There's this Xcode 5 plugin template by Delisa, one of the Alcatraz authors, and you just clone it, put it into this path, and you will end up with a new template for an Xcode plugin. It's Xcode 5.1 compatible. I think it's also 6 compatible. I didn't test it yesterday, but I'm pretty sure it is. It just shows a menu item by default for testing. Which is also great is that the plugin ends up in the right folder. So you just restart Xcode and it's right there. So if you build and run the plugin and restart Xcode, you see the do action item there, which just opens a message box. But then you can get started from there. So we're done. No, let's actually build something useful. I started off with this tweet for that. You know how the debugger always gets in your way when you want to type something in the editor, especially if you have a smaller laptop? We're going to fix this. Some general points about plugins. One thing that came with Xcode 5 is compatibility UIDs. Because like 1 year ago, when we got Xcode 5, a lot of people had crashes on launch with it because they already used Alcatraz, and it was built with garbage collection because Xcode 4 is garbage collected and Xcode 5 isn't anymore. So if you have a plugin with garbage collection, it crashed on launch. Apple invented this mechanism to avoid this. A plugin now states which Xcode versions it's compatible with. Each Xcode version gets a UUID, and in the info.p list of a plugin, it states, okay, these UUIDs I'm fine. If the UUID of Xcode isn't there, of the Xcode you're using, it's not getting loaded. So if you use Xcode 6 now, none of your plugins will get loaded from Xcode 5 unless you put the Xcode 6 UUID in there. And yeah, you see there the error message you will see in the system log. So if you're wondering why a plugin you're writing is not loading and you see this message, it means, okay, you have to update your info.p list. So what will also happen all the time is Xcode crashing. You have a couple of friends to help you with this. One is the system log, as I said. Everything you do in a plugin with nslog will end up there. The other friend is removing all the plugins to actually get Xcode to launch again. And you can also debug either with LRDB from the command line, or if you have two Xcode instances, you can debug from there. So as I said, like there's no public API for plugins. So how do you even find out what to do? One thing is to use class dump to generate header files for everything that is in Xcode, or you use the repo by Luis Solano, who's sitting over there. And you can just clone it and have the headers and don't have to class dump. So now back to our plugin which we want to build. We have basically two problems to solve. The first one is how do we detect that the user is typing? And the other one is how to hide the debugger. So I started with just grabbing for editor in the headers. What I found was this, the header for the IDE workspace window controller. This is basically the controller for the main window you see of Xcode for Run Workspace. And in there you have the editor area property. Yeah, an editor area has among it a couple of methods. One is toggle debugger visibility. What you see here, there's one problem with the class dump headers. You cannot, the class dump thing cannot figure out which object type a parameter or return value has. So you will also see ID for any object. You'll see integers and primitive types just fine, but no class names. That's something you have to figure out yourself. So we have two things we can use from here. Toggle debugger visibility. I never figured out what the argument is. I just pass in nil and it does what it says. It toggles the debugger. And the other one is show debugger area, which should be shows debugger area because it tells you if it's shown or not. So with that, we can write a little method called toggle debuggers if needed. We will go through all the workspace window controllers. We will get the editor area, and if the debugger is visible, we will hide it. Because we don't have actual headers for Xcode, you have to create them yourself. A method I use if it's just a simple plugin is just have a class extension on NSObject with the methods because it's worth it to actually do headers. So for a second problem, which is finding out if the user types anywhere, we're using a different method, which is I did the subtree description of the whole workspace window controller in the debugger. Subtree description is, for those of you who are doing iOS, is basically the same as recursive description. And then I just grabbed for source. What came up is DVT source text view. And what that is just a normal NS text view. And what we are doing now is we want to do something when the user types. For that, we create this little snippet here for the did change text method gets replaced with our own code in the block down there. which calls toggle debuggers if needed, which we wrote earlier, and then the original implementation. What? Something for those who don't know what swizzling is, because we just use method swizzling for that. We take a step back here. You see on the left-hand side the normal way it works. You have a selector A with a selector A implementation, selector B with its implementation. And what method swizzling does is exchange those implementations. So now if you call B, it will actually run the code of A. And if you call A, it will run the code of B. What that enables us to do is we can have our own method, B, which was the block we saw on this slide. And have this be run when we call A. And because we exchanged the implementation, the original implementation is still there when we call B. So what we do is have our own code in B and also the call to the original stuff. So we can make sure that the original code is still run, but also our code. What you saw there were a couple of methods called YL something. It's a little category I made for making the swizzling easier. But actually, I should replace it with the aspects library of Peter Steinberger, because it's much better than my code. Didn't get around to this for this talk. So we get back to our implementation of our method, which we can now understand. On every instance of DVT source text view, we swizzle the didChangeText method and replace it with a block, which calls our toggle debuggers if needed method, and then the original implementation. So now we can see the plugin in action. If something gets typed, the debugger gets hidden. So we have one final thing we have to do, which is actually shipping the plugin. We can do that, as I said earlier, there's a packages.json file in the Alcatraz, for Alcatraz in a special repo called Alcatraz packages. And what you do is just add your own entry for your plugin, short description, and the GitHub URL, and send a pull request. Yeah, we saw two methods for finding out how to hook into Xcode. And there's a final one, which I want to mention, which is using dtrace. dtrace is a powerful dynamic tracing framework built into macOS 10. And it can, among other things, be used to log any Objective-C message send calls. So in the blog post down there, the author of Fuzzy Autocomplete did a script which allows us to filter that output. So if you, for example, we found out that there's a class DVT source text view, we could run the script, say filter all the calls for DVT source text view, then do something in Xcode and see which methods are called on that class. So that's it. I have a couple. First this, big applause for AuthConf and the volunteers, please. There are a couple of links here. The most important one, Alcatraz. But under this URL, you will find the slides, and you can look up all the URLs and the presentation. I have one final thing I want to announce. We will have a CocoaPods hackathon on Saturday after 10 a.m. at the Layer office. And I would be happy if you would come. This is URL. You can RSVP there. You should, because there's limited space. And I hope to see you all there. This one? Okay. Questions? Excuse me?
what do you do on CocoaPods or nothing? I was just
Stuff. Different stuff. What comes up?
I think you're saying that it's pretty stable between 5 and 6. Have you seen any problems where like just in like 5.0 to 5.1 or 5.11 anything broke?
I personally haven't seen them. Of course, there will be some depending on what you do, but basically, apart from the garbage collection breakage, a lot of stuff is the same since 4. This was a big rewrite internally, but 4, 5, and 6, from what we can see, is pretty similar. Of course, depending on what you do, because it's all undocumented, everything can break any day, of course, but overall, it's relatively stable. Yes, we're done.
Okay, so it's lunchtime. We have about 45 minutes. So go out, get food, come back. We'll see you about 12:45. We have a lot of good things. Over at Labs, we have a crash reporting lab. We have Enterprise Mobile Device Management Lab. And then here we have Carla White, Mike Lee, Yang Meyer, Andrew Stone, and then an Ethics in Software panel. So see you after lunch. So our next speaker is here all the way from Berlin. He is working on the iOS SDK at Contentful. He was previously a Java developer, right? He is the senior recruiter at CocoaPods, previously Git submodules. Boris Bügling.
Yeah, hey, we're going to talk about extending Xcode today. First, a quick word about Contentful, because we just launched. There's a coupon code there, which does something when you sign up. This was my last experience with Xcode. Xcode. What many of you may not know is that Xcode itself is basically just a huge set of plugins. And the last time I gave this talk, I was just saying that even though there's no public API, it's probably not going away and is relatively stable. Today I can show you, because Xcode 6 came out and everything still works. So here you can see that Xcode is just a huge number of plugins. So there are a couple of ways to extend Xcode beyond plugins. There are color schemes, file templates, project templates, and the plugins. So now we're talking about using plugins. How does it even work? This guy made it really easy, together with the other two. It's Marin, Delisa, and Yura. They wrote Alcatraz, the Xcode package manager. And you can install it with this little line. And if you do, you get a new menu item, package manager. What we are doing is we have CSS and API. It's JSON, so you can basically for your app, website, anything when you content manage. So, to the talk, the agenda is I'll talk about Xcode, talk about how you use plugins, and then we'll talk about how you can write them. This is quick about Xcode, because some people who are using Xcode are saying like the things you can do with Xcode plugins, it's all built right into Xcode.
Just a quick reminder, if you are on the CCM Events Network, please disconnect and connect to the CCM Guest Network, and the password is CCM Sharing. That's just because we're using the Events Network for live streaming the event.